She was my best friend's sister, the one person I had silently promised myself I'd never fall for. It wasn't even a rule he made, it was one I made for myself, out of respect, out of loyalty. But you know how life works, it doesn't really care about the promises you make when your heart's involved. The first time I met her, it was at his birthday party. The house was loud, filled with laughter and the kind of chaos that comes with too many friends and too much music. And then she walked in, smiling, graceful in a way that wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't need to. Everyone noticed her, but it was like she didn't notice anyone back. Not really. Except somehow, she noticed me. At first, it was harmless. Just casual conversations, inside jokes, and the kind of teasing that comes naturally when you feel comfortable around someone. She'd roll her eyes at my jokes, but her smile always lingered a little longer than it should have. I told myself I was imagining it. That she was just being nice, that she was my best friend's little sister, and that's all she could ever be. But then we started spending more time together. Study sessions that ran too late, coffee breaks that turned into long walks, and quiet talks that stretched into the night. There was something easy about being around her, like breathing in calm air after a storm. She made everything feel simple, even when my thoughts were anything but. Still, I reminded myself of the line. That invisible boundary drawn by friendship and respect. I told myself not to look too long, not to feel too much, not to want what I couldn't have. But the thing about lines is, they blur when emotions start getting involved. And one night, one ordinary night, she came to me crying. Her voice was shaky, her eyes red from tears. Someone had broken her heart, and she just needed someone to talk to. I didn't think twice. I pulled her close, trying to comfort her the only way I knew how, quietly, carefully, like she was something fragile that might shatter if I said the wrong thing. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just a feeling. A slow, quiet realization that I was already too far gone. That the line I promised never to cross was miles behind me now, and I hadn't even noticed when I stepped over it. Her head rested on my shoulder, her tears soaking through my shirt, and I remember thinking, this feels too right to be wrong. I wish I could say I stopped myself then, that I turned away before it got complicated. But love doesn't wait for the right moment. It just happens, messy, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. And from that night on, nothing between us was ever the same again. I met Emma at my best friend Jake's birthday party. I'd known her before, of course, back when she was just the shy, quiet kid who used to peek from behind the living room curtains whenever we came over after school. She'd tag along sometimes, asking too many questions, and Jake would chase her off like any big brother would. Back then, she was just his sister. That was the label that stuck. Nothing more. But that night she was nothing like the girl I remembered. The party was loud and chaotic, music booming, people laughing, lights flashing over the pool. Jake was the center of attention as usual, cracking jokes, taking shots, being the life of his own celebration. And then, out of nowhere, she appeared. Emma. Only, this wasn't the kid sister I remembered. This was someone entirely different. She was full of life, alive in the kind of way that drew your eyes before your mind even caught up. Her laughter carried through the crowd, light and unguarded, like she didn't care who was watching. She moved through people with this quiet confidence that wasn't forced or loud, just effortless. She wore a simple white sundress, barefoot, her hair a little messy from the wind. And still, somehow, she outshined everyone there. I remember watching her tease Jake, stealing his drink, dodging his half-hearted attempts to get it back, making the whole group laugh. She had this way of pulling energy out of people, of making them drop their guard. Even Jake, who rarely let anyone one-up him, couldn't help but smile. That's when I realized, she had changed. She'd grown into someone magnetic, the kind of person who didn't even realize how much attention she commanded. And me? I couldn't look away. I told myself it was just surprise. That I hadn't seen her in years and that anyone would notice how different she'd become. But deep down, I knew it was something else. There was this strange pull, the kind that starts as curiosity but quietly becomes something heavier, something that sits in your chest and refuses to move. At one point, she caught me staring. I remember the way her lips curved, not in mockery, but in quiet amusement, like she knew something I didn't. She walked over, barefoot on the grass, the hem of her dress brushing her knees. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, laughing softly. I stammered something awkward about not recognizing her, and she tilted her head, smiling in that patient, teasing way. "Well, people change, you know. Even Jake's annoying little sister." Her tone was playful, but it hit harder than it should have. Because she was right, she wasn't that girl anymore. And I wasn't sure how to treat her now. We talked for a while, small talk at first. She told me about college, about moving back home for the summer, about how weird it felt to be surrounded by familiar faces that had all grown up without her. I told her about work, about how nothing exciting ever really happened anymore. It was light, easy, like catching up with an old friend, except it didn't feel like that. There was this undercurrent between us, something unspoken but very real. The way she looked at me, steady, open, curious, it made my chest tighten. She wasn't flirting exactly, but there was this spark in her eyes, the kind that made you forget where you were for a second. And then she laughed again, that kind of laugh that bubbles up from pure joy, and it felt like the whole noise of the party faded just for a moment. I wanted to keep talking to her, to keep finding reasons to stay in that moment. But every time she smiled, every time she said my name, a small voice in the back of my head reminded me of who she was. Jake's sister. My best friend's sister. Off limits. Completely off limits. So, I kept my distance. Or at least, I tried to. But when the music slowed and people started drifting away, I found myself watching her again, barefoot on the grass, spinning slowly under the fairy lights, lost in the rhythm of a song only she seemed to hear. It was such a simple thing, but it hit me hard. She looked free, completely herself, untamed and unbothered. And in that quiet, golden moment, as her laughter echoed across the yard and the night air grew soft and warm, I felt it. That first small crack in my promise to never cross that line. Because the truth was, I'd already started. I just didn't know it yet. After that night, things slowly began to change, in small ways at first, the kind that sneak up on you before you realize they matter. Emma started showing up more. Sometimes she'd pop in when Jake and I were hanging out, pretending she needed help with something for school. Other times, she'd just be there, sitting at the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee, headphones in, humming to herself. It didn't seem intentional, but somehow, she was always around. And every time she was, the air felt different. Lighter, but heavier all at once. Jake didn't notice, of course. He was too busy with work, with friends, with everything else. To him, Emma was just his little sister being herself. But to me, every encounter felt like walking a fine line, that invisible one I'd drawn long ago, the one that was supposed to keep me out of trouble. We started studying together. It began innocently enough. She was struggling with her economics course, and I'd always been decent with numbers. She'd sit across from me at the dining table, surrounded by notebooks, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, concentration written all over her face. She had this habit of biting her pen when she was thinking, and every time she did, I'd have to look away, pretend I was focused on the equation in front of me. And then came the jokes. Endless teasing about my hopeless math examples and my inability to stay serious for more than 5 minutes. "You're not helping, you're confusing me more," she'd say, laughing as she tossed a crumpled paper at me. I'd laugh back, pretending not to notice how beautiful her laugh sounded up close. Sometimes, after Jake went to bed, we'd stay up talking. At first, it was about random things, music, movies, how much we both hated Monday mornings. But slowly, those talks became deeper. She'd tell me about her fears, how she worried about not being enough, about disappointing people's expectations. And I'd tell her things I never told anyone else, about my doubts, my mistakes, the things I wished I could change. It felt natural, like we'd known each other forever. She'd listen with her full attention, eyes steady on mine, and sometimes she'd smile softly, not because what I said was funny, but because she understood. And that's what got me. The way she listened, the way she saw through me, as if every word mattered. There was this one night I'll never forget. The house was quiet, Jake had gone out, and it was just the two of us. We sat on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, watching the rain. She was talking about how the sound of rain made her feel calm, and I remember thinking how easy it was to just sit there with her. No noise, no pretending. Just silence that didn't feel awkward. When she looked at me, I felt something shift. Something deep, something dangerous. Her eyes lingered a second too long, and in that moment, I realized how far I'd already fallen. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, not because of anything she said, but because of what I couldn't say. I wanted to tell her that she made the days lighter, that she'd quietly become the best part of them. But I didn't. Because saying it out loud would make it real, and once it was real, there'd be no going back. So I buried it, deep, where I hoped it would fade. Out of loyalty. Out of fear. Out of love that wasn't supposed to exist. But even buried things have a way of growing. Every time she smiled, every time she brushed her hair behind her ear, every time her hand accidentally touched mine, I felt it, that pull, stronger each time. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was connection. Quiet, steady, and real. And the more I tried to fight it, the more it rooted itself in the spaces between our laughter and our silence. She became a habit, one I didn't want to break but knew I probably should. I told myself it was harmless, that as long as I didn't act on it, it was fine. But deep down, I knew better. Feelings don't stay quiet forever. Because love, the real kind, doesn't ask for permission. It just finds you, even in the places you swore it never would. And that's exactly what was happening to me. I was falling for Emma. Slowly. Completely. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop. It was a quiet evening, the kind of night where the world feels still, where the only sound in the room is the ticking of a clock and the faint hum of the city outside. I was half asleep on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when my screen lit up with her name. Emma. I hesitated for a second, not because I didn't want to pick up, but because something in me already knew, this wasn't going to be just another casual call. Her voice was trembling. "Can I come over?" she asked. Just 3 words, but they carried something heavy. I didn't ask why. I just said yes. 10 minutes later, I heard the knock. When I opened the door, she stood there, eyes red, makeup smudged, shoulders trembling under the streetlight. She looked so small, so fragile, that my heart ached before she even said a word. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked straight in, like she needed to be anywhere but where she'd come from. I closed the door softly behind her and followed her into the living room. She sat on the couch, hands shaking slightly as she tried to speak. "He cheated," she finally said. Her voice cracked on the word, and I could see how much it hurt just to say it out loud. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? That he was an idiot. That she deserved better. She already knew all that. So I just sat beside her, close enough to be there, far enough to give her space. I listened. That's all I could do. She talked about how she'd trusted him, how she believed in something that fell apart overnight. Every word came out between sobs, her voice breaking in ways that made my chest tighten. I wanted to take her pain and crush it, to make her forget, to somehow make it right. But all I could do was sit there and watch her unravel. Then she leaned into me. It wasn't planned. It wasn't careful. It was instinct, raw and human. Her head rested on my shoulder, her breath unsteady, her tears soaking into my shirt. I froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought she could feel it. And in that moment, something inside me shattered. Every wall I had built, every boundary I'd drawn out of loyalty to Jake, every promise I'd made to myself, it all broke in silence. I reached for her hand without thinking. It wasn't a move, it wasn't desire, it was comfort, something honest, something I couldn't stop myself from doing. And she didn't pull away. Instead, she laced her fingers through mine, gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The room felt still. The air was thick with something unspoken, something neither of us dared to name. She whispered, "You always make me feel safe." Those words hit deeper than they should have. They weren't romantic, not exactly. But they carried a kind of trust that terrified me. Because I knew what it meant. I wasn't just her friend anymore. I was becoming her comfort, her anchor, and maybe, without realizing it, she'd already become mine. We stayed like that for a while, her breathing slowing, her tears drying against my shoulder. I wanted that moment to last, even though I knew it shouldn't. My mind screamed at me, "This isn't right, this isn't your place," but my heart wouldn't listen. And then, just when I thought she might fall asleep there, she sat up. Wiped her eyes. Took a deep breath. There was a faint, tired smile on her face, the kind people wear when they're trying to convince you they're okay. "Thank you," she said softly. "For being here." I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Always." She looked at me for a long moment, really looked. And for a second, I thought she was going to say something else. But instead, she leaned forward, wrapped her arms around me, and hugged me tight. It wasn't a polite hug. It was one of those hugs that speak louder than words, the kind that say, "I need you right now and please don't let go." And I didn't. Not until she whispered, almost against my chest, "Goodbye." She pulled away before I could ask why. Picked up her bag, gave me one last look, that sad, grateful kind of look that stays with you long after the door closes. Then she was gone. And just like that, the apartment felt colder. Quieter. I sat there for a long time after, staring at the space where she'd been, feeling the weight of her goodbye settle into me like a bruise. Because I knew, even if we hadn't crossed the line with words, something between us had changed forever. And there was no going back. The next morning, I tried to pretend nothing happened. I told myself it was just a moment, a mistake born out of emotion, not intention. That she'd come to me because she needed comfort, and I'd been there because I cared, nothing more. But when I woke up, the smell of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air, and I couldn't shake the image of her sitting there on my couch, crying, holding my hand like I was the only person left who understood her. It wasn't something I could just forget. Jake came over later that morning, loud and full of life like always, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He dropped onto the couch with his usual grin, talking about weekend plans, his new project, random jokes that would have made me laugh any other day. And I did laugh, because I had to. Because the alternative was to break down and tell him the truth. That his sister had been here last night. That I had held her while she cried. That I had crossed a line I'd promised never to cross, even if only in silence. But I couldn't. So I played my part. I smiled, nodded, pretended everything was normal. I laughed when he laughed, added comments when I was supposed to, all while my chest ached with guilt. Every word out of my mouth felt heavier than the last. I wasn't just lying to Jake, I was lying to myself too. And then, just as he was about to leave, she walked in. Emma. She looked calm, like nothing had happened, her expression unreadable. She smiled at Jake first, teasing him about something, and then her eyes flickered to me. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because that one glance, soft, almost hesitant, told me she remembered. Maybe not every word, but the feeling. The closeness. The silence that had said everything we were too afraid to speak. I looked away quickly, forcing my attention back to Jake, pretending I hadn't noticed the quiet sadness in her eyes. But the truth was, I felt it, that pull again, that ache. And I hated myself for it. From that day on, I started avoiding her. I avoided them both. I stopped staying late at Jake's house, stopped answering her texts right away, found excuses to be busy. Anything to keep my distance. Because every time I saw her, it felt like a secret I wasn't strong enough to keep. When she laughed, it reminded me of that night, how her voice had cracked between tears, how fragile she'd sounded. When she walked into a room, it was like everything in me went quiet, torn between wanting to be near her and needing to run as far away as possible. I told myself it was the right thing to do. That putting space between us was the only way to protect what was left, my friendship with Jake, her trust, the fragile line between loyalty and desire that I'd already blurred. But distance doesn't fix what's broken inside. It only makes you aware of how deep the cracks go. She noticed, of course. Emma wasn't the type to ignore what was right in front of her. One evening, she caught me leaving before dinner, my excuse half-hearted at best. "You're avoiding me," she said quietly. I froze. For a second, I almost denied it. But when I looked at her, I couldn't lie. "I just think it's better this way," I said finally. My voice sounded small, even to me. She looked at me for a long time, not angry, not hurt, just sad. "Better for who?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, it wasn't better for either of us. It just felt safer. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything, her voice, her tears, her touch, that goodbye. And beneath all of it, one truth kept clawing its way out: I felt something real for her. Something I shouldn't have. Something that no amount of guilt could erase. I hated myself for it. For wanting someone I wasn't supposed to want. For feeling more alive in her presence than I ever had with anyone else. For knowing that I was betraying my best friend without ever saying a word. Jake still laughed the same way around me. Still called me his brother. Still trusted me without question. And every time he did, the guilt cut deeper. Because love isn't always noble. Sometimes it's selfish. Sometimes it's cruel. And in my silence, in my pretending, I realized something painful: I wasn't the good guy anymore. Not in this story. Not when the person I was trying to protect was the same person I was falling for. I told myself I could control it. That if I stayed away long enough, it would fade. But the heart doesn't listen to logic. It remembers. It aches. It waits. And deep down, I already knew, I wasn't strong enough to let her go. It happened on a quiet afternoon, one of those moments that feels ordinary until it suddenly isn't. Jake and I were in his backyard, fixing up the grill, the smell of charcoal thick in the air. Emma was there too, sitting on the porch steps, sunlight falling across her hair as she scrolled through her phone. It should have been just another day, another easy moment among friends. But that was the problem: nothing felt easy anymore. Every time she laughed, my chest tightened. Every time her eyes met mine, I felt that pull, the one I'd been fighting for weeks, the one that kept me up at night. I thought I was being careful, thought I was hiding it well. But love, the kind you're not supposed to feel, has a way of showing itself, even when you think you've buried it deep. And that's when it happened. Jake looked up from the grill, mid-conversation, and caught me staring at her. It wasn't a long look, maybe just a few seconds, but it was enough. Our eyes met, and I knew. The air changed. The sound of laughter faded. The world felt suddenly too quiet. He didn't say anything. Didn't ask. Just looked at me, that long, searching look that said more than words ever could. There was confusion there at first, then realization, and finally, disappointment. The kind that burns deeper than anger. My throat went dry. My hands started to shake. I wanted to look away, to pretend it meant nothing, that it was all in his head. But I couldn't. Because for the first time, I saw myself through his eyes, his best friend, the guy he trusted with everything, standing there, silently betraying him with a glance. That's when I broke. The words came out before I could stop them. Jake. I need to tell you something. My voice sounded foreign, heavy. He didn't respond, just kept watching me, waiting. So I told him everything. Every single thing I'd tried to bury. I told him about that night she came to my apartment, how she cried on my shoulder, how I held her hand. I told him about the study sessions, the late-night talks, the way I'd started feeling something I never meant to feel. Every word came out trembling, half-choked, but I didn't stop. Because if I didn't say it now, it would destroy me from the inside out. I swear, I never meant for it to happen, I said, my voice cracking. I tried to fight it. I tried to stay away. But she's different, Jake. And I stopped myself before I said too much. Before I said I love her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Just stood there, silent, the sound of sizzling charcoal filling the space between us. His jaw tightened, and I could see the storm behind his calm, the betrayal, the confusion, the pain. But he didn't yell. He didn't punch me. He didn't even look angry. He just stayed quiet. And somehow, that silence hit harder than anything he could have said. I would have preferred if he'd screamed at me, called me a traitor, swung his fist, anything would have been easier than the silence. Because silence meant he was really thinking about it. Silence meant it hurt. Finally, he turned away, staring at the ground. You, he said softly, almost to himself. Out of everyone, you. His voice wasn't angry, just hollow, like something inside him had broken. I tried to explain, to tell him it wasn't what he thought, that I'd never acted on it, that I'd tried to protect him from it. But every word I said only seemed to make it worse. Because the truth was, feelings themselves were enough. I didn't have to touch her for it to be a betrayal. I already had. Emotionally. He finally looked at me again, and this time, I saw the end of something in his eyes. You should have told me, he said quietly. Before it got this far. I wanted to tell him I didn't know it would get this far. That I didn't choose it. But he just nodded to himself, almost like he expected this, like part of him had known all along. Then he said the words that cut deeper than any punch ever could, I trusted you, man. And that was it. He turned back to the grill, pretending to focus on the flames. The conversation was over. But for me, the silence screamed louder than anything else. I stood there, frozen, watching him, my best friend, the brother I'd chosen, realizing that in trying to protect everyone, I'd ended up breaking everything instead. And as Emma's laughter drifted faintly from the porch behind us, I felt the full weight of what I'd done. Love had crossed a line. And I couldn't take it back. We haven't talked much since that day. The air between Jake and me has turned into something heavy, not angry, not cold, just distant. The kind of silence that grows roots, stretching deep into everything that used to feel normal. We still run into each other sometimes, at the same cafes, at mutual friends' gatherings, but it's never the same. The laughter we used to share feels forced now, careful, as if we're both afraid of what might surface if we let our guard down. And then there's Emma. I still see her, too, not often, but enough to remind me of everything that happened, of everything I tried to forget. Sometimes it's just in passing. She's walking out of a store as I'm walking in, or she's sitting in the passenger seat of Jake's car, hair blowing in the wind, that same soft expression on her face. When our eyes meet, it's never for long. She smiles, a small, polite smile, the kind that carries memories you don't talk about, and I nod, pretending it doesn't hurt. Then we both look away before it becomes too much. In those moments, I tell myself that I did the right thing. That stepping back was what she needed, what we needed. That breaking the silence, confessing everything to Jake, was the only way to stop a lie from becoming something worse. But the truth is, I don't really know if it was right. Maybe it was cowardice disguised as honesty. Maybe it was the only way I knew to protect what little was left. Sometimes I catch myself replaying everything, every word, every laugh, every glance that lasted a little too long. I tell myself it couldn't have ended any other way, that people like us were never meant to have a happy ending. But then night comes, and I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and I hear her voice again, soft, trembling, real. You always make me feel safe. That line haunts me more than any goodbye ever could. Because in that moment, she wasn't talking about love, or romance, or anything complicated. She was talking about trust, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. And I broke that trust, in ways neither of us ever wanted to. It's strange, how love and guilt can coexist. How one can feed the other until you can't tell which one you're actually feeling anymore. I keep wondering if what I felt for her was really love, or if it was just the idea of it, born from moments that were too quiet, too intimate, too full of everything I was missing. But then I remember how she made me feel, not just the rush, not just the ache, but the calm. The way she could sit beside me in silence and somehow make the world feel lighter. And that's when I realize, whatever it was real. Maybe not right, maybe not fair, but real nonetheless. There's a version of our story I sometimes imagine, one where timing was kinder, where she wasn't Jake's sister, where I didn't have to choose between love and loyalty. In that version, maybe we got to see what could have been. Maybe I would have told her how she made me believe in something quiet and deep, something worth the risk. But that's not the story we got. The story we got was about restraint, about promises, about the lines that separate right from almost right. About how love doesn't always mean getting to hold on, sometimes it means letting go before you destroy what's left. Jake and I still talk occasionally. It's civil, polite, but the friendship we had, the brotherhood, feels like a ghost now. It lingers in the background, familiar but untouchable. I don't blame him for keeping his distance. If I were him, I probably wouldn't forgive me either. And Emma. I don't know what she feels now. Maybe she's moved on, maybe she's happy. I hope she is. She deserves someone who can love her freely, without the weight of guilt pressing down on every heartbeat. Someone who doesn't have to choose between what's right and what feels right. As for me, I've learned that some stories don't end with closure, they just fade quietly, leaving echoes behind. Little reminders of what could have been, lingering in songs, in smells, in moments that feel too familiar. So maybe I did the right thing. Maybe I didn't. But some nights, when the world goes still and the only sound is the whisper of my own thoughts, I still hear her voice, soft, certain, unguarded. You always make me feel safe. And I wonder if love is supposed to feel like guilt, or if this was the kind that was never meant to last. Because maybe, in another life, it could have. But in this one, all it left behind was silence, and the ache of a story that had to end before it ever had the chance to begin. Love doesn't always come wrapped in perfect timing. Sometimes it shows up quietly, when you least expect it, when your life feels steady, safe, untouched. It doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or fireworks, it just slips in, soft and uninvited, and before you realize it, everything's changed. I used to believe love was something you could choose, something you could control if you just tried hard enough. But I was wrong. The heart doesn't care about rules, or loyalty, or what's right. It beats for who it beats for, and sometimes, that person carries a name you were never supposed to say out loud. Emma's name still lingers in my thoughts, like a whisper I can't silence. I don't speak it anymore, not to Jake, not to anyone. But in quiet moments, when the world slows down, it slips through anyway, not as a regret, but as a memory that still feels too alive to fade. I've spent so much time trying to make sense of it, to justify it, to frame it as something I can learn from. But the truth is simpler, and harder. Love isn't always meant to fit neatly into the lines we draw. Sometimes, it exists in the spaces between, too complicated to keep, too real to forget. Maybe that's what makes it beautiful, and cruel all at once. The kind of love that teaches you something even as it breaks you. The kind that reminds you the heart isn't loyal to reason, it's loyal to feeling. I used to think crossing that line meant losing everything. And maybe I did, Jake's trust, the simplicity of our friendship, the peace I used to have. But what I gained, in some strange way, was understanding. Love doesn't follow the map we make for it. It just happens, messy, uninvited, imperfect. So yes, maybe it was forbidden. Maybe it was wrong. But it was also real. And sometimes, real is the best, and worst, thing love can ever be. Because no matter how hard we fight it, the heart never asks for permission. It just beats. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. If this story made you think about the lines we draw for love, tell me below. Would you risk losing everything, friendship, trust, peace, just for a chance at something real? Sometimes the heart doesn't care about the rules we live by, it just wants what it wants. So, what would you do? Subscribe to CineVerse, where every story dives into the messy, beautiful chaos of love, the kind that blurs every boundary. Because in the end, the best stories are the ones that make us feel something real.